Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. I was brushing up on my history of orcs as it is Orktober. Come along with me as we talk a little bit about the history of orcs from Lord of the Rings to Dungeons and Dragons and even Warhammer 40k, all the while we're painting one of my newest 3D printed models. Before we get into this too much, I just want to point out that this is the model that I 3D printed for this project. It's a Warhammer orc. I have tried to remember his name. Ghazghkull Thraka, I think is what it is. I keep trying to remember it, and I know I'm slaughtering it, but I'm going to be painting him as we go through this stuff today. He just seemed like a fun orc to paint. And as always, if you like this channel, if you like any of the stuff that we're putting out, please like, please subscribe, give us a chance to grow a little bigger and celebrate this Orktober with us and paint some orcs. Over the years, orcs have taken on many faces, many different traits, many different things. I mean, when you look at the orcs from Lord of the Rings and compare them to the Orks of Warhammer, technically they're not even moderately close. The only thing they have in common are dark skin and a very tribal-esque mannerisms. But truth be told, each world out there, D&D, Lord of the Rings, Warhammer, they've all done their very best to make orcs their own in their own ways. Like many of you, I started reading fantasy at a young age, and Lord of the Rings was actually one of the first books that I read, and I loved it. And if my history serves me right, the orcs were actually just a different breed of goblin. And the elvish language referred to them as orcs, and so they became known as orcs to the humans. And in Lord of the Rings, you see various different types of orcs and things like that. But overall, the type of creatures that they were just elves that had been corrupted. You know, they were no longer noble. They were carnalistic. They were destructive. They loved battle and things like that. And Tolkien created these. And over the time, other designers, other developers, other authors have latched on to those orcs and changed little things about them. But for the most part, it's kind of always the same. You know, they are green-skinned, large teeth, tusks, dirty. They like war. Not usually very bright, but almost always incredibly strong or warriors at heart. And so come along with me as we talk a little bit about the orcs from D&D and the ones from Warhammer, because here at Pulsegate Games we like to talk about everything tabletop related, and those are the two that come to mind, especially during this fantastic month of Orktober. In the world of tabletop gaming, when you talk of orcs, there's two things that stick out. And those are, of course, Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer 40k. Now, I know there's other things like Pathfinder, and I mean, orcs, you can find them just about anywhere, but these two are the ones that we talk about kind of the most. And I mean, in the monster manual that I was just looking through, orcs have an entire page dedicated just to explaining what the orcs are, whereas most races only have a couple paragraphs and things like that. And D&D is closely related to the Forgotten Realms books. And so, you know, orcs, if you read those books, you've read about them 100 times. And they are big, they are green, they are angry, they rage. When you think of a class, you think of barbarian. At least I do. And anyway, as I was reading through the stuff on orcs, I came across something that I really liked. And it was that the orcs are savage and fearless. Orc tribes are ever in search of elves, dwarves, and humans to destroy, motivated by their hatred of the civilized races to the world and their need to satisfy the demands of their deities. The orcs know that if they fight well and bring glory to their tribe, Grumsh will call them home. And of course, Grumsh is the god of the orcs, the god that never sleeps. he swore the orcs would rule the world. And since then, they had driven his people to wage endless holy war in the name of his divine wrath. So, I mean, they're the bad guys. They're always going to be the bad guys because they think it's their right to rule the world. And so they're going to do everything they can to get rid of everybody. When I started playing D&D, the first fight that I did, was the Mines of Phandalin. And goblins right off the bat, and so goblins, orcs, those things, they're always there. Even in D&D, the orcs are classified as goblinoid. They're not humanoid, they're goblinoid creatures. And so I always thought that was something that was really cool. And D&D, it's an easy creature to fight, and later on they became a class that you could play as well. And half orcs have been around since the beginning. But orcs in general, just cool. On the tabletop, they're big, they're mean, but a lot of them have a little bit of honor as well, which I always really enjoyed. Now, last but not least, orcs from 40K. I gotta say, of all the stuff in 40K that they have put their own little twist on, orcs are amazing. They're such a cool class. If you don't know about them, let me fill you in a little bit about. Okay, originally they were called Krorks. They were made millions and millions of years ago by the old gods to help fight off their enemies. And back then, I mean, they were 30 feet tall. They were massive, powerful, psychic, just machines of war. And then their gods were destroyed and they were forgotten and they were left to kind of just do what they do for millions and millions of years. And in the case of the orcs in 40K, they became dumb. They became really dumb. And all they want to do is fight. Because they are pre-programmed. That's one of the coolest things about these orcs, is that from the time that they're born, they are pre-programmed to be something and to do something. Their engineers are pre-programmed to make machines, to make weapons, and things like that. And they have it in their brain. And they say that it came to them from their gods. And we'll talk about their gods a little bit later. But anyway, so orcs, they're big. They don't feel pain. They just get bigger. Their currency is teeth. And so they just knock each other's teeth out to get money. And they regrow their teeth. And I think it's the blood moon or something like that tribe are the richest because they regrow their teeth the fastest, and so they can just keep knocking their own teeth out. And so anyway, the orcs are just crazy. Now, I said the Krorks back in the day were psychic. Well, the orcs now are still psychic, but they don't know how to use it. And so the way that it manifests itself is that in whatever the orcs believe, they influence. Their psychic power influences that thing. So for instance, the color red makes their stuff faster. Why? Because they believe it will. Their ships and things like that shouldn't fly. There's no way that they should. But they do. Because they believe it. And it's such a cool thing because, it just allows them to do incredible things. But they're so dumb that they don't use it to the purpose that they should. They just keep fighting. That's all they want. All they want to do is fight. And so they don't want to have a planet where they can live at peace. They just want to fight. And so that's what they do. And they look for big enemies. And if you are a good enemy, they honor you and they respect you. I think it's Commissar Yarrick is a human that they respect. Probably the only one. I don't know if he's dead or not. There's a bunch of stuff out there in the lore. But crazy thing, he's fighting an orc. Orc cuts his arm off. He cuts that orc's arm off, and it's a mechanical arm. And he grabs that arm and sticks it onto his own. And because the orcs watching think that it'll work, it works. And now all of a sudden he's got this cybernetic arm that just works. He has not a fake eye, but like a computer eye that's red. And the orcs believe it shoots lasers. And so it starts shooting lasers. Like, he takes advantage of their psychic powers when he fights them, and they love him for it. And so orcs are just so cool in 40K. They have two gods. The gods are Gork and Mork. And the difference between the two is that Gork is brutal and cunning, whereas Mork is cunning but brutal. And you could go into it deeper, but basically they have these two gods and they fight over which one is the more powerful one, and nobody knows the difference. They are absolute chaos. Oh, and did I mention they're fungus? They're mushrooms. They grow in the ground and they just pop out of the ground. And what do they eat? They eat squigs. Squigs are these little red... It's a mouth with feet, basically, is what a squig is. And they come in every shape and size. Some of them are speakers. Some of them are cars. Some of them are horses that they ride. And they eat them. Squigs are also technically orc, or technically goblin, I guess, because they're all kind of the same thing in 40k. But they are awesome. So, this Orktober, get out there, paint some orcs, play some games with some orcs, and I promise you won't regret it. They are one of the coolest things ever gifted to fantasy, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. And as always, here at Pulsegate Games, if you're out there building your orc world, just don't forget, don't spend too much time building your world that you forget to spend some time in it. Till next time.